a number of military aircraft, at least at 2 bases, have been hit. And this represents a fairly significant portion of the Russian strategic bomber fleet, perhaps as much as a third, maybe a fifth. If we're going to be a little more conservative, this would certainly impede Russia's ability to go about further military strikes of the sort that it's been doing over the course of the last several years.
This is the Expert Series podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. I'm Josh Malm, and it's Thursday, June 6th, 2025.
We also talked about our operation inside Russia, which has seriously weakened their military. Operation Spiderweb showed that modern war really looks like and why it's so important to stay ahead with technology. All our joint investments in drone production, all our shared...
On June 1st, Ukraine executed a covert drone strike operation targeting 4 Russian military air bases, including one nearly 4,850 kilometers from Kyiv in Siberia. The attack, called Spider's Web, involved 117 small, short-range kamikaze drones smuggled inside wooden sheds and launched remotely near the bases. Satellite images and expert analyses indicate the operation damaged or destroyed between 10 and 13 Russian strategic bombers, including nuclear-capable Tu-95s and Tu-22s. Russian officials acknowledged the damage but disputed the extent of it. Clearly, though, the operation was a carefully planned and significant military action. How might Ukraine's successful deep drone strike on key Russian military assets influence the future course and balance of power in the conflict? And how will the increasing effectiveness of low-cost, small-scale drone operations like this reshape the strategic calculus of great powers, especially regarding the vulnerability of critical military infrastructure within their own borders? Federico Borsari and Alexander Lanoszka join me to discuss the logistics and tactics of Operation Spider's Web, its impact and precedence both within the broader context of the war and the nature of modern warfare, and whether it shifts the strategic balance of the war. First, we'll speak with Federico Borsari, resident fellow with the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Federico, how did Ukraine pull off an operation as complex as this far from the battlefield? I'm wondering if you can walk us through what happened and perhaps tease out some of the logistics behind such an operation.
Yeah, I think, based on the information that we have as of now, at least publicly, I think it was certainly one of the most, dangerous, as you said, and complex operations because of the inherently challenging logistic footprint of this operation, striking targets deep inside Russian territory, thousands of kilometers from Ukrainian, territory was definitely a challenge, and it would be a challenge for any country, and especially if you have to conduct a covert operation, because this, for the 90% of its basically conduct was a covered one, and so Ukraine needed to really conceive and devise methods and tools to really go unnoticed and pass through, Russian security, and make sure he could, really bring, closer to the target the system that they needed to use. And so I think, Ukraine decided to do this operation because he had to show and to prove also to allies and partners that it still has plenty of solutions and cards, as someone has famously mentioned in the past few weeks, to really make Russia suffer and to really strike military high value targets anywhere in Russia, and this operation was precisely aimed at showing the weakness also of the Russian military complex, and how difficult it is for Russia to ensure the security within its own territory. And so it decided, Ukrainians planners come up with this plan to use systems, and specifically unmanned aircraft systems that are easy to conceal, that are easy to to move and to really integrate into basically any kind of platforms, because we know that FPV drones are so small, very light, also very cost effective and cheap. And so the idea was basically to shift from an approach that so far has seen Ukraine using larger fixed wing type of drones, kamikaze ones, to this type of small type of platform, the FPV drone type of platform that has been extensively used in Ukraine by both sides, but actually at very tactical level. So we are talking about 20-30 kilometers now with the integration of fiber optic as a guidance type of capability. But besides that, we didn't have proof of FPV drones being used at more in-depth range. So now with this operation, Ukraine proved that it is actually very possible to do so, and it had to do so because we know that the effectiveness of of Ukraine deep strike campaign using larger fixed wing drones was not very successful, especially in the past few months. Russian air defenses have adapted quite well, and so Ukrainians realized they had to kind of change tactics and find new ways to really strike Russia in depth. Sorry, and so that's what that's the reason because of this plan, I think. So on the one hand, the military need to change tactics and find new ways to really damage the Russian military, also thousands of kilometers into Russia, and at the same time they needed a very I would say spectacular operation to show everyone that Ukraine still has plenty of cards and plenty of capabilities to use against Russia.
Do you think it's possible that this recent attack we saw is precedent setting in any way? Could it, for instance, catalyze doctrinal shifts around homeland defense, even for major powers, perhaps?
I think so. I mean, from a concept standpoint, I think this is not entirely new. I mean, there have been examples also in the past, from Second World War on that showed how effective can be, a special operation that is conducted in depth into enemy territory and to destroy high value targets, including aircraft stationed at the air bases. There are multiple examples, and so from a concept standpoint, at least generally, this is not a new thing. I mean, the aircraft parked in airstrips on airstrips and airport are quite vulnerable. We know that, and they are very soft targets. And so if you manage to infiltrate, force inside into enemy territory and go near the target, that's already a significant accomplishment, and you can really create significant damage to your opponent. Now, with the use of FPV drones, of course, that can be integrated into anything from, container trucks, as we have seen by Ukraine, but also into, a little bit larger drones. The mothership concept is now being developed by both sides, and Ukraine has also integrated FPV drones into unmanned surface vessels to strike a Russian energy platform in the Black Sea. So I think this means that critical infrastructure, military installations, any kind of high value target, also in the very deep rear of any country, are now vulnerable quite a lot. Even though, I mean, this threat is not, I would say, not new. It didn't come up overnight, right? It didn't emerge in the past 48 hours. it was a threat that was already there, but no one dared or conceived of using that technique before Ukraine. And so I think, of course, this means that countries like the U.S. and even all NATO allies have to rethink the security of their own military installations. They have to ensure that the small drone threat is properly assessed and take care of when it comes to defending your own military infrastructure. So you need a layered approach that is able to deal with all classes of drones, from the very small ones, as we have seen in Russia, to larger type of systems. But to do so, you need to do investments, and you need also to rethink the apportionment of capabilities within your own force design and force structure. And especially when it comes to protecting critical installations, you need to make sure you have the magazine depth when it comes to using kinetic solutions, but also you need to make sure you have a great and very, very much integrated sensor to shooter network that can communicate among different type of capabilities, because otherwise it's really difficult to deal with multiple, for instance, drones that attack at the same time. You need to have also a very diverse range of capabilities. I think the US and other countries are looking at this type of problem quite seriously. They are investing in new capabilities, and there are promising solutions out there to deal with this. Also the very small, type of drone threat. But at the same time, we are too slow sometimes, and I think now it's the case really to invest more, but also to expedite the integration of these capabilities. We really have to go faster, and so that means a holistic approach from defense procurement, the very high level discussion at the political level, but also how you translate investments and resources into real capabilities and how you integrate them. So it requires really a comprehensive approach, I think.
Do we have any confirmation of the extent of the damages inflicted upon Russia? I think last time I checked, there was 41 aircraft and a claim of about $7 billion in losses. And how does it impact Russia's continued war effort in maybe the immediate term?
Yes, I think 41 aircraft was the claim of Ukrainian authorities and the security service that was the mastermind behind the operation. Mentioned that 117 drones were launched and at least 41 aircraft were targeted. As of now, I think open source information seems to indicate that at least 10 to 12 aircraft have been either damaged or destroyed, possibly more. We are still waiting for more, I would say, clear evidence from, for instance, satellite imagery and other type of sources. But if it is confirmed that at least 10 to 12 aircraft have been destroyed or damaged, and these losses would be very hard to replace for Russia, because we know that the Russian, the state of the Russian air manufacturing and aviation industry is is not very good. They struggle to obtain the components, and they struggle to have the resources to build new aircraft. So losing strategic bombers like Tu-95 or Tu-22 modernized versions is really difficult for Russia to replace those losses. So if that the numbers are confirmed, that means that at least around like 12% or 13% of the Russian strategic bomber fleet is out of order, and so that's a huge blow to to Russia strategic force, strategic bomber fleet, which is a way and a means for Russia to project power. I mean, these aircraft have extremely long range, extremely heavy, extremely big payloads capacity. They can carry a lot of munitions, a lot of missiles, and so they are strategic assets that Russia uses to project power. And if Russia doesn't have access to sufficient number of that, also its power projection is extremely, diminished, which is not only good for Ukraine, because we know that some of these aircraft have been used extensively by Russia to launch, any sort of missiles against Ukrainian cities and civilian targets, but it's also good for the US and NATO, because that means that Russian strategic forces are extremely weakened. And so in a long-term perspective, this is bad for Russia, definitely, and from a PR perspective, it's also bad for Russia, because we have seen, how also effective was for the morale, of Ukrainians. And I was in Ukraine last week for a conference, and I was in Odessa, and the mood among Ukrainians was a mixed, I would say, combination of disillusion, especially regarding the support of some of its Western allies. Of course, the U.S., now with the new administration, have sent a mixed signal to Ukraine. Sometimes, from a public and a communication perspective, they haven't been very effective at, I would say, counter Russian propaganda and support Ukraine publicly. So the mood was not very, very high, I would say, but now with this operation, certainly things are probably, this is certainly a boost for the morale of the Ukrainian forces. Even though they haven't, the Russian side, at least from a diplomatic standpoint, hasn't shown yet any willingness of to change its approach when it comes to Ukraine, and we have seen it yesterday with the negotiations. But I think from a military standpoint, the things are now, are becoming quite problematic for Russia. And if Ukraine has new operations, in the pipeline, I would not be happy to, I wouldn't, I would not be in Russian, on the part of Russia to see what happens. Yeah.
The attack came just before planned direct peace talks in Istanbul. How do you interpret the timing, and could there be any strategy on Ukraine's part here regarding negotiation posture?
Yeah, I think, of course, it was definitely a boost to the morale of Ukrainians, especially the population, but also I think the military, and I'm not surprised that Kiev decided to launch the operation a day before the negotiations in Istanbul. At the same time, I think the negotiations once again proved that Russia really continues to pursue very maximalist demands when it comes to Ukraine. They basically want Ukraine to disarm. They want Ukraine to have elections, to hold elections during wartime, which is, we all know the challenges of that. I mean, 1 million plus mobilized soldiers and personnel, on the front line and around the country, a lot of refugees, millions of refugees abroad. So and an ongoing conflict. So you're supposed to have to hold free and fair elections, and in easy elections in this type of situation. This is impossible. You cannot have elections in this context. But the Russians are continuing to put forward these demands. At the same time, they want all military supplies and support from the West to Ukraine to stop. They want the Ukrainian military to demobilize from occupied territories, and Russia wants the recognition of these territories, even though it doesn't control all of them, and at the same time wants the international recognition also of Crimea, which was illegally invaded and occupied in 2014. So Russian demands are still very maximalist and very, very similar to what in a different form Putin asked in 2021, just a few weeks before the invasion started. So I don't see any reason why we should trust Russia in this situation, and Ukrainians know perfectly that. And the only thing they trust now, of course, it's not only the support of their I would say of the Western allies and partners, but even more they trust their military capabilities, and so I think the yesterday's negotiation didn't show anything uh, particularly new from a diplomatic standpoint. Certainly, a positive outcome was the decision to have this 6,000 per 6,000 exchange of prisoners, which is good. But we know that many more remain in Russian captivity, and especially children. So, I mean, Russia didn't come up with any new proposal, and is just trying to stall the negotiations and to buy time to try to advance even more in occupied territories. And I think that's a real issue. And so Ukraine knows that, and that's why it's also preparing, from a military standpoint, so it wants to increase drone production this year up to 2.5 million of drones. And it also wants to make sure it has the military capabilities to use against Russia. And so more operations may be also in the making, or under the planning phase now.
A final question for you, Federico. If Ukraine can now hit very deep inside Russia like this, does anywhere still count as safe in the war?
I don't think there is I don't think the use of safe the use of the word safe is very ideal now, because we have seen how easy, it depends, of course. Maybe it's not very easy. It wasn't very easy for Ukraine to organize that operation, and in fact it took more than 1 year. But we have seen how certain type of technologies can become really effective and really I would say problematic from a defense standpoint, because they with the combination of different capabilities, including commercial ones, because you can really now rely on a lot of commercial derived capabilities. For instance, from an intelligence and surveillance standpoint, you can use satellite imagery from commercial companies to really build a quite I would say accurate and quite good picture of a supposed target, for instance. And at the same time, you can use a commercial unmanned systems to devise new ways and new tactics to strike very deep into Russian territory, or very deep into any type of territory of an enemy. So I think the word safe is now at very, very endangered, I would say, when it comes to military operations, and the threat is now moving from a very tactical, I would say an immediate threat, or a very direct threat, is moving from a the usual tactical level, operational level, also to the strategic one because of the combination of different type of weapons, from missiles to drones to loitering munitions, and combined with the very I would say advanced type of sensing technologies. You can really build a sensor to shooter loop at different levels and really threaten your enemy or your opponent at different levels. So it's becoming really dangerous also at the strategic level, and so this means that forces need to rethink how they are designed, how they are deployed on the battlefield, and also how they behave on the battlefield in terms of signature management, disaggregation, distribution of forces, and so these are all countermeasures and thing that military planners need to think about when they look at future scenarios. So I'm not safe. I would say I'm not safe to use the word safe when it comes to military operations nowadays.
We'll turn now to Alexander Lenoshka, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science and in the Borsari School of International Affairs at the University of Waterloo, and MLI Fellow.
Last 2 years have been particularly difficult for Ukraine. There have been questions about the supply of Western military assistance to that country in fighting against Russia. Obviously, with Republicans taking control of the House some time ago, it's been difficult for supporters of Ukraine to rally that support in the United States. And so Ukraine has found itself oftentimes on the back foot. Russia has been stepping up its missile and aerial attacks against Ukrainian population centers and critical infrastructure. Russia has also been making very steady territorial gains, albeit at extraordinarily high cost. And of course, since Donald Trump had retaken office in January of this past year, it appeared that there was a lot of pressure on Ukraine to come up with some sort of settlement with Russia in order to bring about a conclusion to this war. And so things were looking particularly dire for Ukraine. There was very little case for optimism. So I think that more or less gives us some of the context. And what had happened on the 1st of June has been long in the making, as a matter of fact. According to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, it's been 18 months in the works to have a fairly significant drone strike against multiple air bases at once, where strategic bombers are located. Strategic bombers, of course, belonging to Russia. They're significant in this war because Russian strategic bombers have been operating in the sanctuary of Russian airspace to launch missile attacks, again, targeting Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure. Using 117 drones, drones that cost perhaps somewhere in the area of $450 US, more or less, each with its own unique operator. The Ukrainian General Staff claims that about 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile carriers were hit. And so the aircraft we mean here are the A-50 early warning and command control aircraft, in addition to Tupolev 95 and Tupolev 22 and 3 bomber aircraft. Now, we don't know whether that estimate is correct, but we do know from open source intelligence released to date that a number of military aircraft, at least at 2 bases, have been hit. And again, this represents a fairly significant portion of the Russian strategic bomber fleet, perhaps as much as a third, maybe a fifth, if we're going to be a little more conservative. because you can only have so many aircraft operating at once, because you need others to do regular maintenance and so forth, this would certainly impede Russia's ability to go about further military strikes of the sort that it's been doing over the course of the last several years.
So we just talked about how Russia lost strategically important military assets, and I can only imagine this would have been relatively embarrassing for the Russians as well. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have demonstrated resolve once again and are probably experiencing a relative morale boost, to say the least. Do you think this latest development spells anything for the dynamics and general trajectory of the war effort in the short to medium term? And does this have any impact at all going forward?
It is hard to tell. I'm a little conservative on this particular question because we have seen the Ukrainian armed forces as well as the Ukrainian security services, indeed the Ukrainian security services that oversaw this operation in the first place, plan similar attacks and indeed launch them with such success in the past. Whether those attacks have meaningfully altered the course of the war, we do not know. We have seen the Ukrainian armed forces sink the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, Lanoszka, early in the war. We have seen an attack on the Crimean Bridge in October 2022. We have seen Russian surface vessels belonging to the Black Sea Fleet more or less retreat to Novorossiysk. We have seen Ukrainian armed forces launch a very daring offensive in Kursk in 2024. So it's not like the Ukrainians have only started to achieve strategic surprise against Russia, hitting and destroying valuable assets. It's just uncertain as to what the strategic payoff will be. I think we can still say that it does deprive Russia of a very meaningful capability, one that has caused tremendous pain and suffering on the Ukrainian people. It is, as you've noted, an embarrassment. It also creates new challenges. The attack, as you've noted, was one where Ukrainian operators flew drones out of trucks parked effectively at gas stations not far from their targets. As is the case here in Canada, a lot of logistical supply more generally in Russia depends on trucks. Now every truck has an air of suspicion surrounding it. If Russia takes that threat very seriously, then that could obviously create very real and challenging logistical bottlenecks. It certainly can create problems for Russian security services. These certainly could rebound to Ukraine's benefit, but to what extent, that remains to be seen.
Does this particular attack and some of Ukraine's more general tactics during the war, the use of inexpensive FPV drones against high-value targets, does this suggest anything about cost effectiveness in future military planning? Is there anything that Western militaries can look at this and learn anything from? Does it change anything like that?
I'm a little skeptical of arguments that this particular episode suggests that these sorts of military assets of the sort that Russia lost are no longer valuable precisely because they've become so vulnerable, to relatively cheap drone strikes. After all, as some estimates put it, the material cost on the Ukrainian side is about $50,000. Estimates on the Russian side range from $2 billion to $7 billion. So there is indeed massive disparity. That being said, the problem that Russia has had is that it has these military assets. It dispersed them across multiple airfields, and dispersal is a means of reducing risk. But they were sitting on the tarmac. They were hiding in plain sight, as it were. They weren't under hardened shelters in a way that Western militaries would have them. And so there are some attributes to this particular operation that are unique to Russia that do not necessarily imply much for Western operators. We also have to bear in mind that the reason why Ukraine has used drones as significantly as it has in this war is because it has suffered from ammunition shortfalls. And so it's kind of made virtue out of necessity. And indeed, we should not necessarily blind ourselves to the general observation people have made of this particular conflict, whereby your typical drone barely lasts a few sorties, has a lifespan of maybe a few days, if that. These drones, in general, experience extraordinarily high attrition. But again, that is, in some respects, a virtue of these particular systems. They are very cheap, easy to acquire, and as such can translate to mass precision, as it were. But again, the fundamental issue here is that Russia did not necessarily go about force protection adequately, and it has paid a very dear price as such.
Do you foresee any risks of more escalation if Ukraine, for instance, continues to strike much deeper inside Russian territory? What might Russia's response be, and could it escalate further?
From the Ukrainian perspective, there's no such thing as additional escalation. They're already at the maximum of escalation because of what Russia has been doing to that country for several years now. From the Western perspective, there may be concern of the conflict widening in geographical scope. But again, I think we have learned in the last few years that both sides to this conflict have been able to localize the war to that strictly between Russia and Ukraine, barring, of course, instances of sabotage and so forth on NATO territory. I don't necessarily see any escalation risks. If anything, this would probably be de-escalatory in the sense that it does deprive Russia of those strategic assets that it can use against Ukrainian targets. We also have to bear in mind that the attack took place on the eve of the second round of peace talks, and Ukraine has always been somewhat on the back foot precisely because of the pressure put on it by the Trump administration. But on the eve of these peace talks, Ukraine did have a new roadmap that envision a 30-day complete ceasefire, the return of all prisoners and children, as well as a personal meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Ukraine, with this attack, in addition, by the way, to the attack on the Kerch Bridge today, the 3rd of June, and possibly other attacks on various bridges in Bryansk and Kursk Oblasts on the 31st of May and June 1st, that Ukraine has shown that it has much more leverage that it can bring to bear than perhaps what was previously believed, both by Russia and by the United States.
It was reported that the Trump administration had not been made aware of the plan for this attack. Is it typical that, like, the U.S. administration would be involved in the granular details of something like this? And I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to how you think the Trump administration's posture has generally impacted the trajectory of the war and negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Let's have two separate questions,
sure.
Bear. Sorry.
So I'll take the first question. So even during the Biden administration, there have been instances where the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian security service did not consult or inform their partners within NATO as regards to a particular attack. There was no such consultation or advance notice given ahead of, for example, the Kursk offensive. And that was during the Biden administration. And certainly what had happened over the course of the last several days has these sorts of precedents. There's a feeling in Kyiv that for these sorts of military surprise attacks, that there is a risk of Washington or some other NATO capital, informing Moscow, perhaps of the belief that such a move as what had happened would prove escalatory. And so it's not necessarily surprising as such that Kyiv would be reluctant to offer up such details. We have to bear in mind that this operation required extensive planning and intelligence in addition to some immense operational security. There were 117 drone operators. There were multiple levels of the chain of command implicated here. The kill chain was very extensive. It comprises multiple points of entry for civilian and military authorities alike. And so informing an outside actor as to this operation could have undone a very careful and very delicate operation as this one.
I'm wondering if we can step back again for a bit of a larger context. Where would you say both sides right now are positioned just over 3 years into the war? And does either side have a specific advantage at this stage at all?
Well, Russia has the advantage of mass. It has been able to reconstitute its armed forces better and faster than what many had expected in 2022, including yours truly. Ukraine has the advantage of individual initiative and national resolve. And it is fighting on home turf. And so the stakes for it are going to be much higher. Of course, there's still plenty in Russia who are interested in this conflict. There are many and many, many volunteers signing up each month to fight in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. But all the same, the balance of resolve is probably very much in favor of Ukraine. There could also be yet another advantage that may be of use to Ukraine, and that is more or less the growing impatience on the side of the Trump administration with Russia. The Trump administration arguably tried too hard in appeasing Russia as regards to Ukraine. It put a lot of pressure on Ukraine to go about negotiations, going as far as suspending various forms of military assistance earlier this year. Putin has shown very little interest in demonstrating good faith in ending the war. He has been launching very, very large aerial strikes against Ukraine. So again, I think what we're seeing in the course of the last several days, if not several weeks even, is that this war is hardly a linear process. It has had its zigs and zags earlier over the course of 2022 and certainly through 23 and 24. I think we're seeing yet more and more zigzagging, and that makes, again, the peace negotiations much more contingent, more uncertain, and indeed the course of the war very difficult to predict.
Moving a bit away from the specifics of the war, we have the return of the Trump administration, or rather the second Trump administration, the Ukraine war into its third year. We have a new Secretary General of NATO, and we have this Rearm Europe initiative, which has picked up a lot of steam in the past several months, and even potentially the ability for Canada to be involved in that to some capacity. What do you envision conversations and discussions will be like going to the NATO summit, and what are some things we might be anticipating ahead of this year's summit?
So I think the classic issue will probably be in relation to burden sharing. That is a favorite issue that the Trump administration likes to raise. It has the feeling that European allies are not doing enough. That's a feeling that it expressed in its first incarnation between 2017 and 2021. And so it's not going to be surprising if we see the president browbeat its allies and try to get them to do more. I think, though, we are going to see perhaps a renewed effort to provide military assistance to Ukraine. How much military assistance those countries can provide will depend, of course, on a number of political as well as defense industrial factors. But I don't necessarily expect too much from this upcoming summit. I think we'll probably see more of the status quo. There'll be some reaffirmation of the importance of increased defense spending. Some are saying now 3%, if not 5%, in lieu of 2%. And certainly the United States will push some allies, particularly Canada, to step up, as it were, in bearing their proverbial share of the defense burden. But outside of that sort of boilerplate issue area, I'm not sure what more I can really meaningfully expect here.
Well, Dr. Lenoshka, we've talked about the recent drone strikes, the logistics, their immediate kind of implications, a bit of a general scene setter for where we are as of now, June 2025 in the war, and a little bit about NATO. Do you have any final thoughts, or are there any other areas you thought might be important to address before we wrap up this recording for this episode?
No, I think we pretty much covered a lot of what had to be covered. I think, again, we should be reluctant to draw any big conclusions from the strategic surprise that Ukraine was able to achieve. Yes, it did strike a number of military aircraft that have caused Ukraine tremendous problems. Hopefully, that will mean a reduction of the violence that Russia has been able to inflict upon Ukraine society. But we have seen Ukraine achieve strategic surprise already, and it still has had to endure Russia being able to throw mass at it. Of course, the aircraft that Russia did lose was very expensive, but also very difficult to replace. Some of these bombers these bombers have not been produced since 1991, so it would take a long time to find a replacement, if not produce them outright. So, there is good reason to be optimistic, but I think we have had this tendency of underestimating Russia's ability to adapt, and may find some ways still to inflict pain on Ukraine. But all the same, this is a very good development for the Ukrainian side.
And that's all for today's episode. The Expert Series is released every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. If you have comments or feedback about what you heard in today's edition, email josh at cdainstitute.ca. I'm Josh Baum. Until next time.